The last thing I remembered was the screech of tires and the violent jolt that threw me through the windshield. Darkness swallowed me before I even had a chance to scream. When I woke, I was surrounded by the sterile white walls of the ICU, tubes crisscrossing my body, machines beeping steadily as if counting down my very existence. My head felt heavy, my chest tighter than I ever imagined, and my limbs seemed foreign, like they belonged to someone else. I wanted to move, to scream, to demand answers, but even breathing was an effort. It took hours or maybe days. Time was slippery before I became aware of the world outside the hospital room. My phone, lying on the bedside table, buzzed incessantly. At first, I thought it was a lifeline, messages from friends, colleagues, well-wishers. But as I squinted at the screen, scrolling through notifications, I felt my stomach knot in a way that no accident could have caused. Bank alerts, large withdrawals, transactions I hadn't authorized, one by one, my carefully saved life's earnings, my future, my security, were gone. The emails were even worse. Photos of my family in Cabo, the golden beaches, fancy dinners, sunsets they had captioned with family fun, and living our best life. My blood ran cold. The faces smiling in the pictures were the same faces I had trusted my life with. The people I had hoped would care for me in my weakest moments. Meanwhile, I had been fighting for my life, clinging to consciousness, barely aware of the world, and they had been spending my money like it belonged to them. My hands shook, and I clutched the sheets, trying to ground myself. I wanted to scream, to cry, to confront them immediately, but the words wouldn't come. My body was still betraying me, and my mind was reeling. I remembered the years I had worked for this money, the long nights at the office, skipping vacations, tightening my belt to save for emergencies and future plans. Every deposit, every careful investment, every frugal choice. It was all gone, funneled into a tropical fantasy while I nearly died. How could they do this? My chest burned with a mixture of grief, anger, and disbelief. These were the people who called themselves my family. The people who promised love, protection, and loyalty. Even as I lay there, paralyzed in body but not in spirit, I could feel a shift inside me. The despair was raw and jagged, but beneath it, a spark of something else ignited. I wasn't just shocked, I was furious. Not the shallow, fleeting anger that fizzles out in minutes, but the deep, smoldering fire of betrayal. They had underestimated me. They thought that my illness, my vulnerability, would leave me powerless. They were wrong, for now, I forced myself to focus on survival. The doctors said the road ahead would be long. I nodded mechanically, but inside, my mind was already racing, strategizing, imagining the confrontation, the consequences, the reclamation of what was mine. One thing was certain, I would rise from this bed, scarred but unbroken, and when I did, the people who had betrayed me in the most intimate way imaginable would pay not out of cruelty, but because justice has its own sweet satisfaction. The hospital room had grown quieter. The machines still beeped rhythmically, a mechanical heartbeat that reminded me I was alive, but the initial chaos had faded. Recovery was a slow, grueling process. Each breath felt like a negotiation with my own body, each step a reminder that I had nearly died. Pain was constant, but what weighed heavier was the betrayal gnawing at my mind. I had survived the accident, but surviving my family's greed felt far more insidious. The nurses tried to cheer me up, but I could see the pity in their eyes, the kind reserved for someone who had been betrayed in ways that went beyond the physical. My friends visited sporadically, offering gentle smiles and words of encouragement. But no amount of kindness could erase the sting of those Cabo photos, the withdrawals from my account, the laughter of the people I had once trusted. They had not only taken my money, they had taken my peace of mind. Days blurred into nights as I struggled to regain some semblance of normalcy. I began physical therapy, moving my limbs slowly, painfully, learning to trust my body again. Each session left me exhausted, but I noticed something changing within me. The anger I had first felt in the ICU was no longer raw and chaotic. It was becoming deliberate, precise. It sharpened my mind in ways the accident could not. I realized that survival alone was not enough. I had to prepare for the reckoning that awaited those who had wronged me. In the quiet hours, memories surfaced, little hints I had ignored over the years. The way my family would subtly criticize my financial prudence, the way they would expect me to pay for things I hadn't agreed to, the veiled envy in their smiles when I mentioned plans for the future. I had overlooked these signs, dismissing them as harmless quirks. Now, in hindsight, they were pieces of a puzzle I had never wanted to complete. They had always valued convenience over loyalty, entitlement over love. The realization burned hotter than any physical pain I had endured. A close friend, Jenna, became my anchor. She refused to let me dwell solely on anger. "You can't fight back if you're consumed by hatred," she said one afternoon, helping me into a wheelchair. "Plan, be smart, and when the time comes, make sure you win without losing yourself." Her words struck a chord. Revenge without thought is empty, but revenge planned with precision, revenge that restores dignity, is power. Slowly, carefully, I began to map out my strategy, not in haste but in meticulous detail. Even in these early days of recovery, I started reclaiming small victories. I changed my account passwords, froze what remained of my funds, and began documenting every transaction, every message, every post that could serve as evidence. It was painstaking work, but it gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since waking in that ICU bed. For the first time since the accident, I felt something like hope, not naive hope, but calculated hope, the kind born from the knowledge that survival was just the beginning. By the time I left the hospital, I was physically weaker than before, but mentally, I had transformed. Betrayal had a way of sharpening the soul. I had felt powerless, abandoned, and furious, but now that fire was tempered into resolve. I was no longer just the victim of my family's greed. I was a strategist, a survivor, a force they had yet to understand. And when the time came, they would learn that betrayal has a price, and that price would be paid in full. Returning home felt surreal. The familiar walls of my apartment, the clutter I had once ignored, the small comforts of daily life, they all seemed different now, as if I were seeing them through new, sharper eyes. The accident had left scars on my body, but the betrayal had etched scars on my mind, ones I carried more heavily than any physical wound. My family, blissfully ignorant of the storm brewing within me, continued flaunting their Cabo escapades on social media, laughing at lives they thought they had won at my expense. At first, I simply watched. I scrolled through their posts, carefully noting every detail, the names of hotels, the friends they had spent my money on, the patterns of their arrogance. Each image, each caption, was fuel for the fire that had been smoldering since the ICU. But I wasn't reckless. I didn't confront them immediately. That would have been too easy, too expected. Instead, I began laying the groundwork quietly, gathering information, documenting every misdeed, every lie, every transaction that revealed the depth of their greed. I discovered that my savings hadn't been the only casualty. Over the years, small amounts I had lent them or entrusted to them for family expenses had disappeared in ways I had never fully realized until now. The thought that they had plotted this long before my accident sent a shiver down my spine. They were opportunists, predators in the guise of relatives, and yet they were arrogant, careless, and dangerously overconfident. I knew that arrogance could be weaponized. With Jenna's help, I began to plan. She reminded me repeatedly that patience was my greatest ally. "They've already underestimated you," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "Use that, let them think they're untouchable. The more they flaunt their victories, the harder they'll fall." Her words became my mantra. I started to rebuild control piece by piece. My finances were secured, my documents organized, my evidence compiled. I researched legal avenues, social strategies, and psychological tactics. Every step was deliberate, every move calculated. Even small encounters with my family were now strategic. I smiled when they boasted about their Cabo photos, nodded politely when they joked about my fragility, and pretended to forgive the stolen money. They didn't suspect a thing. Their laughter, once unbearable, now sounded hollow to me, echoing off walls I had mentally fortified with patience and cunning. I had learned to wear calm like armor, and beneath it, The fire of justice burned hotter with every passing day. I also began subtle acts of sabotage, nothing overt, nothing traceable to me yet, a forgotten payment here, a discreet reminder of obligations there. The family's sense of invincibility began to crack, though they had no idea why. I relished the knowledge that they were already feeling the first tremors of consequence without knowing the source. The psychological thrill was intoxicating, a quiet satisfaction that no outward revenge could match. Most importantly, I realized that revenge was not just about money. It was about dignity, justice, and the reclaiming of my power. Every calculated step I took reminded me that I was no longer a victim, no longer the fragile person lying in the ICU bed. I was becoming someone they would not recognize until it was too late. Deliberate, unstoppable, and ready to deliver consequences, sweetened by the patience I had honed during my recovery. And so, with a steady hand and a sharp mind, I waited. The stage was set, the pieces aligned. The family who had thought they had taken everything from me was about to learn that some debts are paid not in cash, but in carefully orchestrated, inevitable justice. The day I had been planning for months finally arrived. My family, still basking in the glow of their Cabo bragging, had no idea the storm they had sown was about to come crashing down. I had perfected the art of patience. Every detail had been anticipated, every move calculated. As I walked into the room where they had gathered, pretending to be cordial and forgiving, I felt a calm power radiating through me. This was no longer about anger. It was about justice, precise and undeniable. I began subtly, letting the tension build with small truths that pierced their inflated egos. A comment here, a pointed question there, nothing overt, yet enough to make them squirm. Their confident smiles faltered, replaced by uneasy glances. I revealed piece by piece evidence of their spending photos, bank statements, receipts, all meticulously documented. The extravagance of Cabo, once a symbol of their triumph, became a glaring testament to their deceit. I watched their faces shift from smugness to shock, then disbelief, as the reality of their betrayal settled in. The legal repercussions followed seamlessly. Because I had prepared every document in advance, every withdrawal was accounted for, every transaction traceable. They had assumed my incapacity meant impunity, but their overconfidence had blinded them. I didn't shout or cry. I let the facts speak, cold and precise. Their shock turned to panic as they realized the severity of what they had done. The money they thought was theirs to spend was being reclaimed, not through vengeance fueled by rage, but through strategy, patience, and the law. Yet it was not just financial. Socially, I let the truth slip in ways that exposed their selfishness without me appearing vindictive. Friends and extended family, who had long suspected greed and entitlement, quietly took note of the discrepancies. Invitations dwindled, smiles faded, and the aura of superiority they had carried with them to Cabo began to crumble. They were isolated, not by cruelty, but by the natural consequences of their choices. Each subtle consequence was a silent whisper. Betrayal has a cost, and I had been patient enough to let it arrive naturally. Amid it all, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow. The money was partially recovered, the family's arrogance shattered, and justice had been served. Yet, I was reminded of what truly mattered: my own growth, my survival, and the reclamation of my dignity. Revenge had been sweet, yes, but more than that, it had been a reaffirmation of my own strength. I had turned betrayal into empowerment, despair into deliberate action. As I stood alone in the quiet aftermath, I allowed myself a deep breath, a long exhale of relief. The scars of the ICU and the wounds of betrayal remained, but they no longer defined me. I had emerged from the chaos not just as a survivor, but as someone who had reclaimed agency over their life. My family's consequences were a mirror reflecting their choices, but my reflection was entirely my own. A person who had faced near death, endured profound betrayal, and had risen with clarity, strength, and resolve. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. Life had nearly taken everything from me, yet I had fought back, not with reckless fury, but with patience, intelligence, and self-respect. The betrayal that had once consumed me was now a story of transformation, of survival, and of quiet, indomitable triumph. And in that victory, I finally felt free.